IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Hello and welcome to yet another episode of Simblify. We are gathered around our microphones to discuss something called the Metaverse. But before we get into it, we have to start with the profundity, of course.
Yes. And my old friend, Sky Steel, who supplies us with...
Is that the name of the person or the company?
The company. Okay. So we buy a sort of structural steel from them. And, they're doing a great deal for my moral structure as well, because they keep sending me all these tremendously insightful profundities, one of which I'm going to share with you. And it has the Buddha. So It usually is a toss-up between APJ Abdul Kalam, the Buddha, or Nelson Mandela. So this time it's Buddha. And Buddha is saying, good morning. Relationships are not exams to pass or fail, and not a competition to win or lose, but it's a feeling in which you care for someone more than yourself. Have a happy day. So Buddha said it in one of his earlier sermons. So it's pretty profound. And so I just love the Buddha in that thing. Yeah.
I don't know whether I'm getting old, but that one actually made sense.
I think the profundities are getting more profound.
More profound.
Yeah.
The line between the joke part and the actual profundities
is getting blurred now. But maybe we are just getting so old that they're starting to feel that way.
Yeah, if this was
over to that side.
Yeah, if this was episode 23 of Simplified instead of 223, we would have made fun of their exam part. Do they go to coaching institute and all to pass this exam of life? But now here we are contemplating,
guy knows something or two. Yeah.
But okay.
Yeah.
Go for it.
The incongruity of the image and the message is what sort of So you have something like this, and it's a perfect, and there are like a million inspirational quotes out there, all of which makes sense. The thing is, almost never do you read a quote, you appreciate it, but very rarely, if ever, do you change your life based on a quote. So it doesn't happen. So that's why these forwards are mildly hilarious. That's
all right. No, fair enough. So moving on from an actual profound profundity to
moving on from meta to verse. So
from verse to meta.
Okay. Do you guys know what the algorithm that determines if a given set of sections provides a basis? Blah blah blah. Wow.
What?
I don't know, dude. Okay, fine. Basically, let me redo that. Do you guys know what the algorithm that determines if a given set of sections provides a basis for the Mordell weight group of an elliptic surface E tending to S, where S is isomorphic to the projective line, is called?
Mitochondria.
No, it's called the cocksucker machine. And that's, please don't beep it out. It's COX-ZUCKER, like Zucker from Zuckerberg.
Zucker.
Okay. Yeah. And why is this hilarious? Because these were two professors, David A. Cox and Steven Zucker, who found each other and knew that their coming together will create something called cocksucker, and then they created something out of it. So
lovely.
Wow.
This is brought to you from the wonderful Instagram handle Depths of Wikipedia. So,
that handle.
Moving on from Zucker to Zuckerberg, why we're discussing Metaverse is because earlier this week, as we are recording on 7th of August, Mark Zuckerberg basically said that he wants to turn Facebook into a metaverse company, right? So obviously we had to try and figure out what this is about. Any of you have heard about the metaverse and what it's about?
No.
I mean, just expanding beyond physical bridging physical and virtual, that sort of thing. And Facebook has anyway been doing a lot of work in the VR space. So I'm guessing this is a formalization of that.
Yeah, pretty much. So it's about like convergence of physical existence and digital persona, right? That's what the metaverse
all
is
those
about.
Movies have now become reality.
Yeah, but also like accelerated massively by the pandemic, right? So pretty much remote work or hybrid work or whatever you call it is here to stay. And now the actual discussion is not about, if people will go back to offices. It's more about how can you engineer something like a virtual water cooler, right? So like the serendipitous conversations that happen in a workplace, can you actually like have a model where it can be done digitally, right? So and in a better manner, because technically the water cooler conversation has the limit of physical presence, right? So only if you're on the same floor do you run into people, whereas the virtual water cooler means you can basically have informal interactions with anyone, like from the CEO to someone who's in the US or Europe or even China for that matter, right? So that's really where things are going for the future of work. But of course, Metaverse has its first origins probably in the gaming world, right? So,
so this is actually a really interesting concept, because I mean, it's the biggest conversation that's happening since the pandemic has happened, and especially in fields like advertising, where we've been having a lot of these discussions. Because I mean, if you look at it from a net, technically, all the jobs that we are doing, there is no real need, especially as strategists. There is no real need to be in office at all. Like, we don't need to be physically present there at all. But there are, like we said, these intangibles where you have those water cooler conversations and you are whatever. There was a bit more work that we put into this, and it was all about a lot of life's lessons actually come from situations you find yourself in or are forced into unwillingly, right? And is where all of this stuff comes in, where there is no sometimes you need to just quickly have your lunch and you're stuck in one corner of the office and there is someone else over there, and you end up having a conversation. If you were to be given at every point, be given a choice about where exactly you would rather be in this moment, you would choose those other situations and therefore not have those serendipitous encounters in some way. So that becomes really interesting. And conversely, what also happens is, and a lot of organizations in this pandemic have tried to recreate that environment by saying, oh, let's just do Zoom calls where everyone's hanging out together, similar to the metaverse argument, the metaverse concept that you were discussing. But it rarely works so, because even when you're talking about a water cooler conversation, a conversation is never between 20 people. A conversation is between maybe 2 people, 3 people, or 4 people who are talking about one particular thing. And the physical proximity brings a whole bunch of I mean, it's about the way you're eating something, the way you're talking about something, that sparks something else off. When that physical presence isn't there, until we're able to digitize our entire self and wander in a space where we can actually have these interactions that feel like you're having a physical interaction, a level of these online interactions never quite will replicate that serendipitous interaction in some way. So there is a limit over there. And when Zuckerberg says that, we want to create a metaverse, I think there's a long way to go to realize that, from my perspective, when I look at it.
Yeah, but I think Facebook is beautifully placed to do that. And I'm guessing
it is at the forefront of it. Yeah.
And Tony, I'm guessing that segues beautifully into your
absolutely.
research on this matter and the interview that you did with.
But Srikeit, you're right. And basically, he's talking about like a 5 to 10 year horizon where Facebook is going to turn into a metaverse company, right? So one of his points was, even today you can spend a lot of time on the internet, but basically you're spending it on glowing rectangles, right? Whether that's your phone or Zoom windows, right? So his point was you're looking at grids of faces on a screen, and that's not how humans naturally interact, and that's not how you process information, right? So technically, if you're in a physical meeting and you're sitting to my right, your voice comes to me from the right side or across the table, and the view changes and stuff like that. So the obvious first thing, therefore, that would apply to this work and meeting context would be the virtual reality or hologram sense of meetings, where you are no longer necessarily like physically in the same place, but you are technically in the metaverse in the same place, right? So that's one part of it. I think when 9/11 happened, there was this thing about the biggest competition about flights is not, another airline company, it is Skype or something like that, right? So we've been discussing these things for the longest. But even before the work part, this has existed in some sense or form for a very long time, right? So the origin of the term metaverse is actually from a 1992 novel called Snow Crash, right? And so basically there he proposes, he talks about a urban environment developed along a single 100-meter road called a street that runs around the circumference of a planet, which is like 65,000 kilometers long, right? So, and the point is that in that sort of world, all of it is basically virtual real estate, which is owned by obviously like a company. And then just like you buy physical real estate in the real world, you sort of can buy virtual worlds and basically exist in that entire sort of metaverse in itself, right? So that is the idea, and so it's about basically the convergence of physical existence and digital persona. And it's you have seen this in certain gaming platforms like Fortnite and Roblox, I think, are the main ones, which I honestly have no idea about except for what I've read upon this episode. But essentially their funda is that you get to have avatars, and there's also an economy that is there, because how you appear in that game or in that space is important to you. Therefore you spend money around it. And what has happened in the last couple of years is they actually have like real concerts, right? So a real sort of artist does a concert within Fortnite, which you can buy tickets to and attend, sort of virtually around that person, which is like the starting point, right? So it's not just a game, but an entire sort of your persona and what you like and what you want to attend and stuff like that.
Yeah, in fact, the trailer for Christopher Nolan's Tenet was actually premiered inside Fortnite.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So a lot of things have happened. So it's become more than just a game. So I don't think any of us here are gamers, save Srikeit to some extent.
Yeah. So similarly on Fortnite, the other thing was also, I forget the name of the artist, but virtual concerts are becoming a big thing.
Yeah, Marshmello started it off.
Marshmello,
a lot of the pop artists have done it. You always hear reports of some metal band or something also doing their own sort of things now that this thing is a precedent. And a whole lot of other things have happened. Like last year, for example, a lot of colleges recreated their colleges in Minecraft and did virtual graduation ceremonies and all that. And when I say virtual graduation, it's not like a Zoom call and just have the college facade in the background or something, but they've recreated the college and their little avatars are receiving the diplomas and all that. So a lot of these things are very cutely being recreated, but I think Zuckerberg's vision is really more than that. I think eventually the end goal to all this is when brain computing interfacing also becomes a thing, we will all sit inside pods and our physical being will be somewhere, but our actual being will be somewhere else. I'm not necessarily convinced that that's a bad thing, but I think that's sort of like where all this seems to be going towards.
A Ready Player One kind of.
Yeah, it is exactly that. It is Ready Player One, and that's definitely something that anyone listening to this, interested in this metaverse, should either watch or read.
Yeah, so we've basically at this point talking about like siloed metaverses. Like Fortnite is one, your work environment is another. But metaverse technically is like the next internet, which means, you connect to the internet through one device, then you can access multiple sites. The
metaverse interoperability.
Yes.
Buzzword bingo.
Okay, I think we'll come back after a break with more on the metaverse, and
it'll become a paraverse.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On a bonus episode of Storytellers and Storytellers, Vineet is joined by Tanishq Bakshi, who shares about making music for the film Shershaah. We have a new show, The Last Brand Standing. Anupam Gupta and Ambi Parmeshwaran get together and discuss some of the biggest and most public feuds in Indian brand history. Do check that out. What do brains and saturated fat have in common? Find out with Ashton on The Habit Coach. On Simblified, Chuck, Tony, Srikeit and Naren discuss why the Chinese government killed its tech sector. On the Filter Coffee podcast, Karthik and filmmaker John Lefkowitz talk about the genius of acclaimed filmmaker Walter Murch. And on Echoes of India, find out how Anirudh talked to Gautam Buddha himself. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Seat, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quater, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back to a most fascinating conversation on metaverses, a meta conversation, if you will. And
just imagine a future of podcasts where instead of listening to us, you are in the same room as us.
And you can't run away. Yes.
And you can't run away. The only way to run away would be like the Matrix. You actually have to. So you have one life you can choose to. I imagine a lot of people might actually.
It's like our producer Vinay would become like a virtual bouncer standing at the door, like preventing people from getting out.
Stop people from getting out.
Getting out. तुम आ गए अभी इधर ही बैठो.
Yeah. Actually, we could have a reverse clubhouse. So you have clubhouses. You can have a reverse clubhouse.
Like the other club.
Clubhouse.
Okay, but Tony, you have let us not steal your thunder.
No. So we discussed about gaming where it's most naturally there.
Yeah.
Of course, there used to be like Second Life, I think it was called, which did a lot of this. We spoke about work and basically the future of work, or actually the present of work, and the concept of infinite work, right? Because one of the things that's currently not working very well is these spontaneous conversations or innovations, or actually just having that camaraderie and transparency of communication, because we are all, working on rectangles and pods, and you really don't want to connect beyond a certain point, right? But already this has applications elsewhere, like fitness, for instance. We spoke about on our Getting Meta episode about how like collaboration or working with certain people is very key to sustaining many things. And I would think like fitness is one of those things, right, where if you are sort of on the same path or journey with someone else, then it becomes a lot easier. So actually fitness has applications in this augmented reality format, right, where you can take sessions with multiple other people and sort of be in the same space as them and do that as well. So
not just that, but if you remember this device called the Microsoft Kinect, which was a motion sensing sort of thing. So I have seen some version of that. There are some desktop games, for example, which uses the webcam to track you so that you can like burst bubbles and stuff. So it's some sort of a fitness kind of game. And I've seen virtual reality games where you actually have to jump and stuff like that. So I can imagine fitness actually benefiting greatly from the metaverse. So you make it more fun. So instead of just doing, 100 jumping jacks and burpees, you're actually either on a trek or you're jumping to avoid sort of thing, certain things. So actually, I think it can. There are a lot of experiences that can be enhanced because of virtual reality and or
augmented reality.
Yeah. And one thing I wanted to say, Tony, before you move on, in case we don't discuss it again, is that whole thing about Second Life and all that, right? So some of these games have become so central to people's identity that they identify more with their virtual avatars more than the character. And if that seems outlandish, I think I think we all know and ourselves have been guilty sometimes of letting our online personas dictate or be known by what we do on Twitter more than this. So this is really cool where there is this game called Choices, for example. It's a very silly game. All of you probably got ads for it at one point of time, where you're in a certain social situation and you have to take a choice on whether to go on this date or not go on this date or whatever. Some of these people have so carefully maintained and built their avatars and reacting how their character would rather than how they would. And they have virtual meetups of these characters and all that. And it's fascinating. Many of these people consider their physical bodies just to be a vessel, whereas their real soul and all that is actually in their virtual avatar. It's incredible just reading accounts of these guys. You'll find a lot of this obviously on Reddit and stuff like that.
Yeah. So actually this also lends to, a couple of years ago, we did a research on a lot of on Gen Z and their gaming
habits.
And
by we, Srikeit means his company and not we as Simplified. Simplified
not
does
as
not
Simplified.
do research.
Sorry, my bad. When my company and I did some research on Gen Z, and we actually spoke to a whole bunch of gamers. There were a lot of gamers who were. It was really particularly difficult to interview a lot of them because it became so clear about how uncomfortable they were with in their real world skin, like what gamers often refer to as meat space instead of so it's cyberspace and meat space. MEAT. Meat space is real life. It's meat space versus cyberspace. So they were like,
as opposed to Barbecue Nation, which is what Srikeit and I would probably call meat space.
Yeah. So, but their identities were so difficult over there, so that actually when we wanted to speak to them, they were really reserved, and we weren't getting very far with their conversation. So we actually got them to play with their friends while they were talking there, and we literally talked to them inside the games. And that's where we actually got a lot more. Like when they were playing PUBG, we actually got into their PUBG games and talked to them via chat. And only then would they really. And there they were radically different people. They were open. They were. It's not just like it. And people assume that the guys who are conservative online, they go and start start abusing people and stuff. They were respectful. They were guiding. They were trying to teach players who are kind of noobs to play better in some way or the other. Their entire facets of personality started opening up when they got in the game. But when they were out of it, they were just like quiet in a corner, awkward, not willing to talk to anyone.
It's amazing because as a society, we would prefer the latter in some ways than the reticent former.
So actually, the basis for the metaverse are already in place. Yeah. And in fact, we also see this to some extent with with Ready Player One, again, referencing the movie, where there's this the one of the main characters, or even his best friend, who is a trans woman, and her identity is her real life identity is really muted versus the online identity is a boisterous person who's really expressive about all of these things. And so the base of those identities with gaming, with online expression are already in place to some extent. The building blocks are already there with a lot of the younger generation. I think the technology, in fact, needs to catch up to these personalities so that to kind of like really liberate them into that online world.
Wow.
Yeah. It's almost like glorifying the Matrix.
Laplace transform or a Fourier transform, where sort of everything goes from the time domain to the frequency domain. Everything was very easy, and then you come back to the time domain. So I don't know whether that analogy works for people who haven't suffered mechanical engineering, but
No, so absolutely. So two things there, right? One is about the flattening of distances. It doesn't matter where you're physically. Second, also about the social capital itself changing, right? It doesn't matter who you are in the physical world, which is a pure accident of birth.
Yes.
But in like these virtual worlds, you basically get to be whoever you really want to be without the constraints of society, right? So that's actually a very liberating experience for a lot of people. Right? So those are great. And I think what Zuckerberg is saying is that it's not about getting people to spend more time on the internet. It's about getting people to spend more time on the internet more naturally, right? So, and like Srikeit said, the tech needs to catch up. And that is slightly where you can see Facebook's selfish reasons coming in, right? And I mean, I'm not saying that in a disparaging manner, but it's great because currently, if you look at Facebook or Instagram or WhatsApp, everyone's on it all the time. But what is their one hitch is that people access it through either an Apple device or an Android device. And the gatekeepers of the platform are these guys, right? Whereas when we are talking about augmented reality or virtual reality kind of situation, it's likely that you'll connect to the metaverse through an Oculus or something like that, which Facebook owns and gatekeeps to some extent, right? So this is probably why it's a great sort of pivot for them or evolution for Facebook, because now they are the gatekeepers of the
Plus think of the new kinds of exciting ad formats you can see in the metaverse. I don't know if you guys saw this, but I forget which firm is working on a technology where you see contextual product placements in videos. So the original movie might have a Coke ad, you might end up seeing a Pepsi one, or depending, like just think of these as banner ads, for example, within movies or something like that. So the movie that you see, where the storyline and all that remains completely the same, I might see James Bond in one car, you might see completely in another, depending on, say, browsing history or things like that. And what you're saying, Tony, like all that just takes it to another level. The opportunities really become, there are opportunities to do so much more immersive sort of advertising. And that kind, when pro digital folks like us, we look at the opportunities that the digital medium offers versus print and radio, it's very easy to think that metaverse advertising and all that will make digital and what we think of as innovative and all that right now seem very, very outdated. Because at the end of the day, even YouTube is two-dimensional to an extent right now. You have potential to do 3D. That's so much. So if you work in advertising, run, because your clients are going to ask you for all sorts of things. What is our metaverse video strategy, for example? You know, a PPT is coming at the end of this. 3-dimensional PowerPoint is like fresh consultant hell.
So they're already sort of doing this in sports arenas, right? Where you had those like painted ads on the ground. Now, they can just be virtually placed depending on where the thing is, right? And it seems like it's on the grass itself. Obviously, it depends on the broadcaster and how well they do it, but that's possible. But I love how your mind first jumped to advertising.
We look at it now, context.
But from a designing and creator perspective, right? There's a lot to be done. So if you're creating a new world as the metaverse is, there is a lot of scope for people to design spaces where people hang out, right? And the creator economy in that sense is one thing that will see a huge boost.
In fact, I was reading a report. Weirdly enough, I think it was by CTS, that spoke about what the jobs of the future are going to look like. And obviously, many of them are fascinating. And one of them I still remember was virtual world architect. So it's not just for the metaverse, but even they're assuming that, say, even workspaces or hybrid workspaces will evolve to a point where it's kind of interesting, actually.
I feel it will be even more deeper. Like I feel once the concept takes off, virtual world architect will be the equivalent of calling someone a scientist in today's day and age. What kind of scientist?
What kind of virtual world architect?
What is that? So there might be some guy who just designs on making really good virtual grass. And so he's like a virtual terrain designer, or some other person is like a great virtual
music
landscape designer, or a music designer, or an interiors designer in some way. Like
I'm already excited about this. It's just, if you take a step back, it's just amazing to think that in 1930s you had companies that were struggling to get electricity into their homes and offices, and like a century later, which is when I guess a lot of this will mature by 2030. We are already thinking of making the physical body sort of redundant, and all of us are going to be living on the cloud or whatever.
There is one dark thing. Okay, so in the real world, okay, so if I'm bullying someone or someone bullying me, people can see evidence of that. And in someone's really hitting me, and I'll bruise, and someone will ask me, why have you bruised? And you say, this person hit me. I'm talking about kids, okay? And in a multiverse, there will be no evidence of that. So that's going to be
actually different,
problem.
you will have documented evidence of it. Technically, you will have.
Yeah, it should. But most of these sort of spaces, I don't know whether where you're interacting, whether all of it is recorded. Yeah, maybe it is. Maybe
no. But another way to think about Naren, you're the worry that you have is correct, and it actually points to something larger. Like we are worried about people hacking into our glowing rectangles, as one of you said. Now think about hacking into a metaverse or something like that, which is.
Hacking into your character.
Yeah.
Hacking. So this is, you have a self-image. You have a self-image, and I can destroy you by destroying your self-image. And if that happens, I don't know, maybe kids are easier to, easier to.
If I may make a prediction, I think a lot of this metaverse, high thing and all that will peak in the 30s. And then there will be this move back to the physical world, as there always is, like how we are finding vinyl and all that sort of cool right now. I think in 2050 will look a lot closer to 2020 than a sci-fi Jetsons like future.
So from Naren, what you said, one of the things that is actually there in all these kinds of metaverses is that there is obviously a gender skew, and the basically liberated selves means that women don't necessarily have the same experience of these virtual worlds as men do, right? So, definitely there are going to be darker areas, and how do you regulate and how does it get built when Facebook itself is being, criticized for the existing version of what it has created. So those parts will definitely be there, right? But think of when we spoke of the creators and designers, it also points to a different kind of economy, right? So we spoke of, in the past, we've spoken about NFTs, blockchains, cryptocurrencies, without really seeing where is the damn use of this thing, right? So, but let's say you're creating your own workspace and you have an NFT of the my friendship cancelled meme, and you have it displayed on your wall, right? Or I want to work in the space created by you, and I sort of pay you a certain amount to do that, or buy real estate, etc. So it's going to be a completely different economy from multiple parts. One is to say that it doesn't matter where you're located, and Zuckerberg also talks about how there is scientific evidence of the zip code you're born in determining the amount of money you'll make when you're 40 or 50 or something, right? That changes. And also the currency itself changes now, right? To crypto or beyond that. And many of these use cryptocurrency, but also there are things that actually just sell converted real estate from the physical world in the virtual world, which take credit cards as well. So it's like the opportunity is fairly massive, even from an economy standpoint.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how this will go. I want to especially I want to ask Srikeit. Suppose Sapiens was being updated rather than say 2100 or whatever. Where does this whole metaverse and that sort of thing feature on the on the scale of things right now? If Yuval Noah Harari was to write about this, obviously he'll talk about the dangers, this thing, that thing, and all that. But how do you think this fits into human history overall when you look at it in the perspective of language was invented just about 50,000 years ago, the printing press was invented just 200, 300 years ago, the internet was created just 50 years ago, rapid acceleration.
Yeah, so in fact, Yuval Noah Harari does address this, not in Sapiens, but in Deus, Homo Deus.
Correct.
And where he does, the whole, how you reconcile with technologies as such is, he talks about it as in three terms, right? There is, and it is actually ties a little bit to our previous episode about China, where we were talking about the physical versus the metaphysical in some way, where there is the need for physical infrastructure. And once we set the physical infrastructure in place, transitioning ourselves to an online world would also, so far what systems of control exist is to control our bodies. Our physical bodies are controlled in a certain way, restricting us what to do. But if existence, and so far online existence is just limited to thoughts and words and not physical presence online. Like we don't live online. I mean, we spend a lot of time there, but we are still restricted to our physical locations. But if our existence starts moving online, it will immediately mean governments will need to start exercising more control to that sphere. And it will also be graded in some way where more advanced economies will develop systems of controlling and would actually prefer their audiences being online because they might develop systems of control over there. But I can almost imagine like a situation in our country itself where a lot of people start living online and the government's not able to reconcile or drive systems of control in that online space, and literally have people snatched from their pods because like they are doing something online and there's like not government like literally physically pulling the plug on the person in some way so that they can't participate in that online discourse. So there's a whole gradation of compatibility that comes. So the very first thing that needs to be done, just like in Maslow's hierarchy, the very first thing that needs to be done is to ensure physical security of the person who's trying to ensure trying to go online. Because at the end of the day, it does come from the physical being, right? So that physical security needs to be established, and only then can you start talking about anything beyond that. And the other thing being also that when we are talking about living the world online, we are still using resources from an offline world to kind of transition our life online, where we're still going to be using electricity, which is generated by some energy source. We're still going to be using silicon and materials and screens and all these kinds of things, which are all created in the physical world. So completely transitioning our life online without focusing on the means of production, and whoever controls the means of those production, who's handling your data farm, who's handling your server farm, who's producing all these materials, are going to get increased control over what the world is going to look like in the future.
So your point is basically no matter how evolved the metaverse gets, there is still like a physical limitation somewhere, which I think really is the underpinning of a lot of this sort of sci-fi, right? Like no matter how here it gets,
exactly,
keep in mind that it's everything that you're doing is still plugged into a socket somewhere.
Every sci-fi novel.
That's magnificent. If you really want to get mind-bendy about this, we can like take it to another level and say that in a few years, consciousness itself will get dissociated from this physical presence, which at the end of the day is just a vessel for who we really are. And assure you that none of us are intoxicated when we are talking about all this. But this is one of those conversations you can then have, right? Like if you can separate consciousness and the true soul being, all that sort of thing from
truly get liberated from your physical body.
And then who knows what your virtual avatar will be, right? It doesn't need to be in this biped form.
These things will cease to exist. Right? And in which case so because till now, and the thing is, human history, the core of existence and consciousness is humans need to control, and humans fundamentally need to collaborate. And collaboration also leads to a level of control and hierarchy. And the hierarchy needs to enforce its control from time to time, otherwise it ceases to exist. And in which case, when we move to this world, we don't know how that control will come. It depends on how sophisticated the hierarchy is.
I have one last question to ask Tony, as the parent of somebody who is still in single digits. How does what she is studying right now, for instance, prepare her for a world like this? While there is some inevitability that we will live in, like some parts of us will live and work in the metaverse. For me, the scariest part is not that kids will be in that world. I think that's an inevitability, but that the education system right now is completely unequipped for these kids to deal with what is coming. Like, I'm sure you thought about this a lot. So anything on that?
No, well, I mean, not really, but also like we grew up in practically a pre-internet era, and then like did our actual growing up in an internet world, right? So I am not too worried about kids figuring it out. It's more going to be how we deal with it as like parents or caregivers, right? Like right now, even now, I mean, this is again probably going to be an unpopular opinion, but lots of people think that reading books is a great virtue, right? I mean, it used to be maybe 50 years ago. Now there are several ways in which you can get your information, right? And get it more authentically rather than just a two-dimensional flat page.
Sure.
Of course, there is great value in that, but what you get on a curated channel or Netflix or YouTube or even virtual worlds is going to be much, much better than a book experience merely, right? So, and I see the greater pushback coming from, educators and parents and caregivers rather than kids themselves, who will just figure it out.
They'll figure it out. They'll figure it out. Yeah.
But then the real question becomes like what Naren spoke of in terms of the safety and stuff like that, right? So even now with these, even with YouTube, right, there are like, you're always worried about what kids are watching, right? And you have really no way of sort of being in complete control. And that's something that we'll have to deal with. We are dealing with. It'll just be in a much different form.
And that really is my worry. Like, I feel like, see, if kids were left to themselves, they'd figure this shit out for themselves. The problem is there's society and an entire structure that is telling them, like, for example, don't go online completely. Everything that you see online is evil, or you have to do these 3, 4, 5, 6 things. And kids will rebel, and then they will find out the bad things or whatever it is, where in fact education should be lock and step with how technology is evolving, so that they can actually sit them down in an early age and say, okay, these are the parts of the internet to go to, not go to, these are the risks and all that. But maybe that's too much to ask for.
I'm saying in some senses, this has already happened generation on generation. Like 3, 4 generations ago, you grew up in the same village, you met people from there, you shared the same religious, political beliefs, cultural beliefs, etc. The next generation, after a while, kids started going out to cities and got corrupted. And when you got back home, parents were like, what are you doing? Not praying or not doing this or that. What is this haircut, for instance, right? And in the next generation, people went online and started talking to and having cultural exchanges with people from completely different geographies and stuff like that, and started speaking like that, right? The lingo and the language changed, although you're physically here. And now in this generation, it'll just go to the next level. I think we've always figured it out. It'll continue to be. It's just, as a parent, my only hope is that I don't inflict too much damage. And if there comes a situation where my child is hurt, I can be there for her. I think that's about it.
I think that's a nice, profound note to end on.
Actually, sorry, I just wanted to cover one last thing, which is about how do we create a metaverse, right? Because currently we're talking about extremely siloed things. And are there like standards to creating a metaverse like the internet exists, right? Like W3C standards exist and stuff like that. So 2 key principles of the metaverse is going to be interoperability, which is to say different systems can pick up
speak to
each other and exchange data, right? So like an identity interoperability would be that your defined identity in the metaverse gets carried across various places that you go to, right? And the other one is about portability, to say, okay, in the metaverse, I'm working in this workstation of mine. Now I just want to be immediately teleported to the comedy show that's happening, I don't know, miles down the line in the virtual world. That's to happen. So far, idea of traveling fast, the imagination or the limitation of the imagination was around something like Hyperloop, where you could travel really fast. But now with this, basically teleporting is going to be a reality. Right? So actually, there is multiple standards that are evolving, but I guess the most important one is probably the virtual worlds standards for systems, virtual components, which the IEEE is running, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, because unless and until there is one sort of world that wins out, everyone will be trying to create their
own competing.
So I think that's what we'll need to see. Basically, I think Facebook, Microsoft, all of these guys are in a consortium called XR Consortium or something to build out the metaverse. And I guess 10 years down the line, on Simplified episode 1000, we'll see how this turned out.
Our first metaverse recording will be about the metaverse, looking back at episode 223, I think. Lovely. I think that's a wonderful way to end this. So, Naren, I think we know what to do.
That was
now people can stay
totally profound. So stay safe, stay meta, and stay simplified.
We used that 2 episodes back, but I will let it pass. See you guys, and see you in the metaverse.
Namaste, this is Cyrus Brocha. I am part of the government cancel culture program to remove rubbish off all the different streams available. So what we have is all the collected rubbish we put together on our show. It's called Cyrus Says. It's on IVM podcast. You have to watch it and listen to it. It's on our app. It's on our website. It's on the YouTube channel. It's on Facebook. There are many different ways. Don't bother me and ask me how. You have to find out. We talk to different personalities. Many of them are known. Some are just people we meet downstairs and invite them up for chai. But the point is, it's fun and it's very therapeutic. So please join in and listen to Cyrus Says.
Hi, I'm Zarina Poonawalla, host of the Empowering Series podcast on the IVM network. I happen to be a peak performance coach and leadership coach by profession, and I'm here to share with you productivity tools, life-altering techniques, and real-life hacks to help you achieve your maximum potential in everything you do, your relationships, professions, careers. So tune in every Monday to unleash your inner power. Be safe, be well, be empowered.